Hello, welcome back to Name TBD Weekly Tech News. This week we'll be covering three different articles: AI in the Shadow over Democracy, NASA's Lunar Exploration Program Overview, and SDA addresses contract concerns. So, for the AI and the Shadow over Democracy, essentially high level, this article details some of the threats that AI poses to democracy by generating false news, essentially, be that text, be that deep fakes, and essentially sowing misinformation into the public discourse to lower or threaten the institution of democracy as a whole. What do you think about that? Any thoughts?
I think overall the article is really interesting. Like, if you don't know anything about the space at all, but I think most people who have heard about AI have heard about deepfakes. So I feel like this article is really nothing new. It's kind of a nothing burger. Like, how do you feel about it?
I kind of felt the same way. I mean, deepfakes have been on my radar for a couple years now. I think that there was some celebrity adult content produced that kind of brought that into the spotlight long before ChatGPT brought AI as a whole into the spotlight. I think the most substantive part of it was the very end where it hinted at the regulations that are coming down. It didn't do much on actually providing insight into those. So I did a little bit of a brief look into what kind of regulations were out there, what was coming out. I guess is that something that you touched at all on your research?
That's nothing I looked at. No.
Okay, I'll detail it very briefly, high level. Essentially, the EU is currently leading by actually producing an AI regulation bill, making sure that fundamental rights, any AI that threatens fundamental rights, so in the sphere of education, healthcare, and policing, essentially are kind of outlawed. They have very strict requirements and completely banning facial recognition, like the Clearview AI that's kind of taken over American policing. The United States is lagging a bit behind. All we have is an executive order by Biden that kind of says tech leaders, be responsible here, be transparent, but not any substance. And then China is kind of taking its own route where as different AIs become popular, like TikTok, or I'm not super familiar with the ones in China right now, but they essentially create targeted bills each time they feel threatened by one of those. So much more of a patchwork instead of coming out with a broad, sweeping, preemptive regulation. China's taken more of a stab approach of whenever one comes up, they regulate it. It is interesting that the European Union has taken taken the reins and started this. It's not a huge surprise to me, concerning they've kind of been ahead on the privacy and other personal rights.
Yeah, they're pretty quick to regulate. Period. Like, it seems like anytime that there's any big like technical advancement, it's like, oh, it's already regulated in the
Yeah,
EU.
I guess I
Uh,
don't, being from the American perspective, I guess I don't know if that's beneficial or actually like harmful to the industry as a whole. Is that
One thing I was kind of curious getting on that, like, one thread from that is like he kind of calls out, and this is actually, I sat in on a hearing the other day that was kind of talking about some of the proposed ideas like that the US is going to do.
Mhm.
And a lot of the things were like, oh, you have to develop your AI in an ethical way. And every time I heard that, I was just like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is an ethical,
I had
like, how do you even define that?
the exact same thought. So when they say you got to make it, you got to develop it transparently, it's like what does that mean? Does that mean you just need to say I'm developing this, it's going to do this, or do you need to produce your source code for everyone to see? Like what? It seems like a very vague regulation to something that's going to be very powerful and kind of you know tough to tough to completely enclose with just a bill.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like to me like it once the cat's out of the bag with this thing, there's really nothing you're going to be able to do. Like, no matter how you would try to regulate it, I just feel like you can't.
That was I had this a similar thought. The One of the things that the article also proposes is other ways to combat it, and it's also once again very vague in those. And I looked in, and the most common like way people are trying to combat them is with other AIs to identify AI generated content as a whole, which I think is kind of a flawed approach from the beginning. It's kind of like making an anti cheat for a game. You're always going to be one step behind the thing you're trying to get a grasp on. Because as soon as you get a full
And let's
grasp on
get
it,
back to that because we got
yes,
back.
that leads us to our next topic, the Artemis. I found an article that said a new country had joined the Artemis program, and for me, I hadn't really heard much of the Artemis program. I feel like it's being a little bit slept on compared to the space race when we first went to the moon, where it was a national pride thing, as in all of America kind of knew what was going on and that this is what we're working towards. And with Artemis, maybe I had the wool pulled over my eyes, but I didn't know much about it. So I kind of looked into.
And I sort of had heard about it, but that was just because I lived in Huntsville and like there was a lot of stuff going on down there related to it.
Mhm.
But even then, like I didn't hear about it like every day, and it was literally happening in the city that I lived in.
Which is it's crazy. I feel like for the scope of this project, everyone should know about it. After reading into it, it's kind of mind boggling. So just
What should we know about it?
yeah, once you know about it, it's really cool. Essentially, this is the white papers essentially that I've been reading were written in 2020. So there's some of the things they lay out have kind of changed now that we're looking back on it from 2024. But essentially, America wants to be a leader in space. Now that a couple other countries have demonstrated the ability to touch the moon as a whole, America's once again kind of gotten their engines ignited to say, hey, we gotta maintain our dominance here. But interestingly enough, this time it's not going to be strictly an America first. Like we're going to do it, we're going to take the credit for it. They're trying to make it much more of a collaborative approach with a lot of other nations, and the list of nations is quite long. A lot of them on there are ones that you might expect. You know, your Germany, your France, your European Union countries as a whole. However, there were a couple that really surprised me. A couple of them are the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Rwanda. Countries that you don't necessarily think of when you think of going to space, touching the moon, putting manned missions into space. So I thought that as a whole was pretty interesting. But just to keep things moving, a couple of the things that this program wants to do is create sustainable travel to the moon as kind of a launching point to then do the same thing with Mars. So this involves creating the Orion spacecraft, which is going to take people to the moon. It's going to involve a gateway system that kind of orbits around the moon as like a orbiting base of operations. It's going to have a ground exploration system, new rovers, and create essentially the goal with a couple of the iterations of Artemis is to put people on the moon long term in a collaborative way with other countries so that everyone can benefit. Right now, in the white papers, they said 2024 was going to be when they first put a person on the moon. As you can probably tell, that has not happened so far. They're definitely behind schedule. The current...
By how much?
As of right now, when they said they were going to put the first stages into Earth's orbit as of 2022, right now that's scheduled for November of this year. And they're targeting 2025 for the first human mission to the moon, followed by, in 2026, a second manned mission to the moon to the South Pole to start getting the actual base set up. That's where this Artemis base camp that you see in the bottom left corner is going to be. And then starting in 2028, they're targeting for the first use of the Lunar Gateway Station, which is going to be where they kind of dock up and essentially create
30 seconds.
A space station orbiting the moon. This is the patch for this program. I think this is freaking sick. But I think even cooler than that is each mission, Artemis 1, 2, 3, and 4, the actual patches that they give to the anyone involved in it and put out in line in the publicity material are actually designed by the crews themselves. And just as a side note, I thought that was extremely interesting. But we'll jump on to the SDA addresses contract concerns.
So the basically the gist of the article that I read can be said kind of like this, right? So there's this new agency called SDA, and it has a future 1,000 satellite distributed missile sensor project that it's working on, and that organization has received a lot of criticism for its use of fixed price contracts. This is causing like a huge bit of tea for the contractors because this is something that they had expressed like problems with earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a gist of what a fixed price contract is. What do you think that means, Mason?
I think that means they decide the price of the contract right away, and then it doesn't move at all with time.
Yeah, and the SDA, it really likes to target that type of contract as like that's like one of its main mission objectives. It always wants to use these fixed price contracts because it alleges that for like a 2 year type development process, it forces the like contractors to basically use technology that's already developed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not trying to like play the game of R&Ding anything.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, there's been instances. I think it was Northrop Grumman. They proposed something, and then they got contracted by SDA, and they had to like renegotiate because of supply chain problems that just randomly came up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of like a broader theme that a lot of the contractors are kind of complaining about. They really don't like these fixed price contracts because they feel like it gives them no sort of like flexibility if things go really wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's kind of this damned if you do, damned if you don't thing for SDA because they really want to put the pressure on these guys, especially the bigger primes like Lockheed, Boeing, and Raytheon or RTX now.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem that's happening, this is kind of a thing. So in the article, Lockheed says, hey, we don't have any projects that we must win right now. We're in a really good boat. So kind of what they're saying, the subtext, is like, hey, if you start, just relying on these fixed price contracts, not just for the SDA, but across the Department of Defense when you're building these projects, we're just not going to go for them. And we're going to let the B team take it, basically. So think about it like this, right? Why is that interesting? Like, the SDA is trying to rely on the expertise of these big primes in order to pull off these 2 year projects because it's asserting, hey, look, you already have this technology. That's why we're telling you we're going to set it up for like a 2 year fixed price. You should just use what you already have. Well, that can kind of maybe fall apart if a lot of the bigger primes just start saying, nah, screw it. You can go find someone else to do it. And then you're relying on B team guys who you have no risk profile for.
Uh-huh.
So the Department of Defense is now working with someone that they really don't know if they can develop the project. Like they might have access to the technology, but they don't have as much experience interacting with the department. So this is where the T is, because I think it's interesting. Like over time, we're probably going to see like, oh, one of these primes will pull out of some big project, and then some B teamer will be there, and then the development agency or another agency is going to look really bad.
I guess I didn't realize that the big players had that much leverage. I mean, it sounds like they're kind of saying, like, give us what we want or we're not going to play ball.
Be, or maybe they won't not. Like, you know what I mean? It's hard to tell. But, like, in the Department of, like, Defense's contracting, like, they always complain that they're basically just going to the same three people, or, maybe it's four if you include, like, L3 Harris.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of playing that game of we want to diversify, and but it's like what happens if they actually do, and it seems like you're getting at these guys think screw it, try to do it without us, let's see.
Right.
So I'm really interested in this, not necessarily because of what it sorry about that coof, what it means just for like technical stuff, or what it means for the SDA. But where that will go, like if like the SDA will win, or if the primes will win. What do you think?
I see it. I definitely see how this is a double-edged sword, because if you do diversify the amount of agencies that can offer, they can fulfill these contracts, it seems like a net win for the United States as a whole to say, we got additional players, increasing competition. We're going to get a better product as a whole as these guys jostle for it. Capitalism 101, but also
Hey, that
in like the
we gotta
short
hit our
term.
backlog now.
No, um,
Yep.
I'll complete that thought real quick within this backlog. It seems like um, the small players, once they are proven, if they do prove themselves, it seems like it could be a huge win for everyone. However, it's kind of a gamble where if we produce this system with B team players and it's a B team system, we're kind of losing our edge as a whole. So I'm actually very interested to see where this plays out. I do have a couple questions about the system that's being developed more so than the drama. Is this is just the United States creating a missile tracking system? Is that correct, or is this?
I'm
Uh,
not entirely sure if there are collaborators, but it is something that's supposed to help us specifically. I don't know if it's NATO
mhm.
wide or if it's just us. But essentially, yeah.
And how many satellites did you say were going to be involved in this?
At the end, it'll be 1,000.
Dude, that's a lot of satellites.
Yeah, they're low Earth orbit too, so they're like basically where the SpaceX shit is
Hmm.
or stuff. They're right in that little thing. They're gonna put 1,000.
That's that's very. And I guess what stage of this project are they in for this specific one? Is this early or is this with? I think you said Lockheed has taken this contract. Are they still?
They're pretty early. Like so, the agency itself spun up like about 4 years ago.
Hmm.
Uh, and it only has it has 50 satellites in 4 years up. That's pretty decent. I don't know if like what their timeline plan was, but they already have 50 in 4 years, and there was COVID-19 in between those. So.
Right. I assume the supply chain problems were kind of tailored or resulting from that when everything kind of got gummed up.
So I'm gonna let you ask. What do you want to talk about with this last little bit here?
Yeah, I guess if it's okay with you, I'd like to do a quick brainstorm of AI as a whole and where it's going. I know it's a buzzword that I feel like is a bit overused right now for where the technology's at, but and it's trying to be crammed into everything that doesn't necessarily need it. Is that a sentiment that you are feeling, or is that?
Oh, totally, dude. I think that AI is the biggest buzzword of all time. Like it is. I feel like people are just tossing it literally into everything. Like I've seen in hearings and stuff like that, like a whole bunch of people just tossing it for nothing. I don't know if you've seen it in advertisements.
Oh
It's
yes.
kind of like the it's like the quantum buzzword thing that you hear now.
Oh yes, and don't get me wrong, ChatGPT, which personally I give the credit for kicking the ball off, is an extremely impressive. I don't know if I'd call it a tool because I don't. I think the things that people are using it for a tool right now are misapplications of it, essentially using it to cheat their college assignments and essays. But I think it's useful. It's extremely cool, but I don't know if I think it's quite as um, you know, industry breaking as everywhere. You hear that all industries are going to get shaken up, and I think for certainly some of them are. I think your tech support could probably be primary. When you call your bank and you get stuck with an auto or a robot on the other end, I think that is a huge application for it to actually make those usable and not terrible. But I don't right now see it. Reshaping every aspect of our life as we know it. I could, that's
I don't know.
definitely.
I think I'll push back on that. I think it will transform a lot of like low level cognitive work.
Hmm.
It's just going to get rid of that. So, for instance, like secretary type stuff,
Hmm.
uh, it seems like that's where it's kind of going. So, like you said, like call center stuff,
Hmm.
like we're basically getting away from the middleman that just reroutes people to different experts.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, that will be big. So, a lot of people who are doing kind of cushy little jobs that didn't really require like any real skill, just the ability to read,
Hmm.
I feel like that's where this stuff really shines.
I will definitely say I'm fearful for my grandparents now that. The it used to be the scammers in Nigeria and other places had to type up the English themselves, which is a huge giveaway if you found terrible English in an email coming in trying to get you to send money. It was easy to detect. I think the skill barrier for ChatGPT or other language models to crank out scam emails for them with proper English is definitely concerning. But
And and on that thought, you have any final closing thoughts for
no,
our audience as we tie up our backlog?
I think I'm satisfied. Um,
Well, thank you guys for listening. This has been your TBD Tech News of the Week.
Tune in next week.